So here we are at Luxcon 2024, which has turned out to be quite an exciting event with different authors coming from the UK, for example, or from Ireland. So sitting next to me is Peadar or Guilín.
Peadar or Guilín. Hello.
Hello, from?
I'm from Ireland. I live in Dublin. I grew up in Donegal in the extreme northwest, a really, really beautiful and wild area.
And that's not all you've done in your life, so you write books.
That is correct. I write books, and the type of books I write are young adult. They tend to be very scary books. Parents don't usually like them, but the young adults enjoy them a lot.
And that's what counts. So today I'll be chatting with him about the writing process and the writer's life. So my first question to Peadar would be about plot. So do you start with the plot before you start writing, or do you come up with the plot as you go along?
Yes, I'm usually one of those who comes up with the plot as he goes along. I am what is sometimes called a pantser, in other words, someone who writes by the seat of their pants, or what George R. R. Martin called a gardener, someone who just lets things grow and sees what happens. So in my book, The Call, a lot of young people in it are summoned away to a kind of fairyland, and they're hunted down when they're there. So it's quite a scary experience for them. And the thing is, when I wrote that book, I wrote it in the present tense. And the reason I did that was for each call, I myself did not know how it was going to end. I didn't know which of the teenagers would survive and which of them would not. So it was as interesting for me, I think, and I hope that if I don't know what's going to happen, my hope is that the reader won't know.
Well, that does sound interesting, and probably gets adrenaline pumping for a lot of your young readers. And but maybe this should have been my first question. So what sparks off a novel, or what sparks off an idea?
It can be absolutely anything. For The Call, so one of the things that happens in The Call, as I said, teenagers are summoned away to this kind of horrific sort of fairyland. And what happens to them is that they disappear and all of their clothes fall to the ground. And that's kind of the first thing that happened for me as an idea. I was going for a walk one day, and as I was outside, I had this vision, literally of somebody in a crowd, they disappear, all their clothing falls to the ground, and everybody around them knows that something horrible has happened. Now, when I had that idea, I didn't know what the horrible thing was, but that's how it started. So then I had to figure out, well, why did they disappear? Where did they go? What was the horrible thing that was going to happen? And so usually when I write a book, it's not one idea it's based on, it's usually based on two ideas. Two things come together, and when they come together, they make something new. So the first thing was they disappear. And then maybe a year later, maybe several months later, I was thinking about Irish mythology. And one of the ideas in Irish mythology is that we Irish people were not the first people to live in Ireland. There were many other groups of people before us. But one of the groups was called the Tuatha Danann, the people of the goddess Danu. And we defeated them in battle. And when we defeated them, we exiled them. We sent them somewhere else. So I put these two things together. These people who were sent away, because how would they feel about us? We're living in the country that they thought was the most beautiful place in the world. They called it the many-coloured land. But we're living there now and they are not. How will they feel about us? And my idea was they don't like us very much.
Well, we don't know that. So another question is about character. For example, how do you make your characters, how do you give them, make them a bit quirky, like they wear too many rings, for example, and does that have any significance, or how do they stand out in the reader's mind? Any tips about that?
I don't. I have no tips about it. I'm not very good with that all the time. How I make characters is literally how I have one character maybe to start with. How does that person spark off somebody else? because none of my characters exist in isolation. They exist as part of groups or parts of families, okay? And it's how they react to other people that kind of gradually, you know, it's like making a sculpture. You knock all the bits off that are irrelevant. So they kind of develop as the book goes on in the first draft, and then by the time I get to the end of the first draft, I know what sort of person this character is supposed to be. And once I do that and I go back and start writing again for the second draft, I make them more themselves at that point. If this person, you know, had 3 rings, then maybe when I go back, oh, that person wears a lot of rings, and then maybe I'll put 10 rings on them. You know what I mean, when I go back. So that's kind of how they develop.
Yeah, good, great. Okay, so one more question is about dialogue. So any tips about dialogue? Does it need to be lengthy? Does it need to be cut down, or needs to be very sparse because you're writing for young adults who are not very, verbose in a way? Any tips about dialogue?
Well, I think some young adults are very verbose. You know, some of them do like to talk a lot. My nephew, when he was 5, talked more than any adult. I can tell you. You know, it depends on the person. Every person is themselves. So one thing I like is that everybody has to speak like themselves. So there's a thing in linguistics where you have a language, and under that language you have a dialect which is spoken in a smaller area, and then every single person has what's called an idiolect, which is a set of word choices that only they make. That is just them and them alone. So I try and get into the character's speech patterns. How would they speak? So that sometimes what's the ideal? It doesn't always happen, but the ideal is that if you see 5 lines of dialogue, even if it doesn't say said Sultana, said Peadar, said John, right? Even if you don't see that, you know who's speaking, because only John speaks like that, only Sultana speaks like that, and so you know just from the look. I can't always do that, but that's the ideal.
Well, those were very interesting tips, and so you mentioned that you've been coming to Luxcon for a long time now.
10 years.
For 10 years.
Yeah.
So this is your 10th anniversary here.
That's correct.
Well, on the one hand, welcome to Luxembourg. Maybe it's a bit late. It's the second day of Luxcon, and we hope to welcome you again next year.
Thank you very much indeed.
So thank you for sharing your tips with us today.
Thank you.
And good luck with your writing journey. Goodbye.